Why did no one ever look her in the eyes when she walked past? The courtyard was alive with voices, steel boots clicking against polished stone, the clatter of rifles being slung back into formation. Yet as she passed, the air seemed to thin. Jokes softened into whispers. Backs straightened. A few dared a glance, only to turn away quickly, as though her gaze carried weight they couldn't carry. She said nothing, she never did. Her uniform was spotless. Her boots shone even under the pale morning sun, not because anyone inspected them, but because she did. It was ritual, almost prayer, the act of order in a world that often offered her none. That morning a group of younger guards lingered by the barracks arch, laughing, pushing shoulders, one of them mimicking the stiff walk of the palace guards. His friends chuckled. Their eyes flicked toward her, waiting for her reaction. She kept walking, her chin steady, breath even, not a word, not a twitch. And that silence crushed their laughter more than any reply could have. What they didn't know, what she would never tell them, was that she had once been like them. Carefree, joking, the type to laugh loud, to fill rooms with warmth. But that was before the desert, before the convoy, before she learned how quickly sound could become absence. Now she wore discipline like armor. Yet beneath it, a quiet tremor of memory. The sound of gravel cracking under her boots pulled her back. She reached her post, northern gate, where marble columns rose like frozen giants. Her hands rested on the rifle slung across her chest. She didn't grip it, didn't fidget. She simply let it be, as though the weapon itself drew steadiness from her body. Hours passed that way, watching, listening, becoming part of the silence. That was her gift. She could disappear into stillness. But stillness wasn't peace. Every once in a while the memory returned. A flash of heat, the ringing in her ears, her brother's last glance as dust swallowed him. She never spoke of him here. The palace had no room for ghosts. And yet guarding this place, this hall of power, where decisions were made that bent the lives of soldiers, was her way of speaking for him. Quietly, without words. "Guard!" The voice snapped through the courtyard. A commanding officer, tall, with shoulders carrying more medals than expression. He strode toward her, boots deliberate. His eyes searched her face, but she gave him nothing. "The dignitary from the west arrives today. Precision matters, no distractions." "Yes, sir." 2 words crisp, measured, enough. He gave a slow nod, perhaps approval, perhaps indifference. She didn't need to know which. When he left, one of the younger guards from earlier edged closer. His smirk wavered as he stopped just shy of her shadow. "Doesn't it bother you?" he asked, voice low. "The way they look at you, the way they—" She turned her head just enough for her eyes to meet his. Not sharp, not angry, just steady. He swallowed his next words and backed away. Silence again. But she felt it then, the burn beneath the surface. Not anger at the mockery, but at herself, for letting it reach her, for feeling anything at all when discipline was supposed to be everything. The convoy arrived by noon. Black vehicles, windows tinted like secrets. Engines rumbled low, then died. The courtyard straightened. The palace guard stood taller, rifles aligned like a silent choir. She didn't blink as the dignitary stepped out. A foreign suit, polished shoes, an entourage that looked both powerful and fragile at once. Cameras captured it all, every angle, every salute. And through it she was a statue. But inside, her heart pressed against her ribs. Because she recognized one of the faces. Not the dignitary, not the aides, a man in the third car, gray suit, tired eyes. He had been there, in the desert, not in uniform, not with a rifle, but there in the shadows of politics. She remembered his voice, calm, too calm, telling her unit to hold just a little longer. Minutes before the ambush, her fingers twitched against her rifle sling. She forced them still. No one else noticed him. To them, he was another nameless aide. To her, he was the echo of the moment that took everything. The parade of footsteps moved past, up the palace steps. Into the hall, she stayed at her post, stone still. But her mind screamed. How could she stand here, saluting the very man whose choices had drawn her brother into that fire? How could she wear the uniform of silence while memory clawed at her throat? A breeze moved through the columns, brushing against her cheek like a ghost's hand. She closed her eyes for half a breath, pulled the air deep into her lungs, let it settle. Discipline, she reminded herself. Discipline is louder than anger. Still, a question gnawed at her. Would she always be a statue? Or was there a moment coming, unseen, inevitable, when silence would no longer be enough? The courtyard fell quiet after the procession vanished inside. Only the faint hum of cicadas remained. The other guards shifted, whispered, waited for orders. She stood unmoved. But inside, her resolve cracked just slightly, enough for a thought to slip through. If the past had walked back into her life, how long before it demanded something from her? She didn't know yet. She only knew it was coming. And when it came, the discipline that shielded her might be the very blade that cut. Why did her hands shake when no one was watching? It was late that night, long after the dignitary's arrival. The palace lights burned golden against the dark, washing the courtyard in silence. Guards rotated, footsteps echoing down the marble hallways. She had been relieved hours ago, but she didn't leave. She sat alone on the edge of her bunk, boots still on, uniform still perfect. Her rifle leaned against the wall, silent company. She stared at her hands, perfectly still when held out in front of others. But here, in the solitude of barracks shadows, they trembled. Barely, but enough. She clenched them into fists until the tremor vanished. It wasn't fear, she told herself that. Fear was weakness, and weakness didn't belong here. But the truth was harsher. It was memory, it was recognition. That man, the one stepping out of the convoy, had brought the desert back to her. The sand, the heat, the sound of her brother's voice, alive one second, gone the next. Her chest tightened. Guard! The voice startled her. One of the younger recruits leaning at the doorway, uncertain. His name was Rahim, barely 20, wide-eyed, restless. The kind of boy who still believed soldiering was about glory. He hesitated before stepping in. You don't sleep. She didn't answer right away. Words were not her instinct. Silence was. But Rahim didn't leave. He lingered as though he had questions stacked inside him, waiting to fall. Finally, he said, "They say you never talk, not unless an officer speaks to you." She glanced at him. His face searched hers for something, approval maybe, or curiosity. "They mock you," he added carefully, "but they're afraid of you too." Her lips tightened. 1,000 replies pressed inside her throat. None escaped. Instead, she leaned forward, reaching for her rifle, checking its chamber, wiping it down with a cloth. The ritual steadied her. Rahim shifted. "My brother was in the southern convoy last year," he blurted suddenly. "Didn't come back." She froze. Slowly, her eyes met his. For the first time, someone else carried a reflection of her own story. He gave a nervous smile, thin and broken. "So, I get it, the silence, sometimes it's easier." She wanted to tell him no, silence was not easier. Silence was heavy, crushing, but if she spoke it, it would make her discipline unravel. So she simply nodded, a small, sharp nod. Enough. Rahim lingered another moment, then slipped back into the hallway. She stared after him, and for the first time in years she felt less alone. The next morning the palace stirred early. Briefings, orders. The dignitary's schedule dictated the pulse of the day. She stood in formation, listening, her posture perfect. Heightened security. Anonymous threat issued overnight, the officer barked. Western delegates will attend tomorrow's council. Any breach, any misstep will not be tolerated. Her eyes narrowed. A threat, anonymous, it could be nothing, it could be everything. And beneath the officer's words, her mind whispered, what if it's him? The man from the desert, the aide in the convoy. What if his arrival was not coincidence but the opening to something larger? No, she couldn't let her thoughts unravel into paranoia. Discipline, hold the line. Later, stationed at the inner hall, she stood as the dignitary's delegation passed again. And there he was, the aide, his gray suit blending into the others, his face bland, tired, forgettable to anyone else. But to her, he was a scar walking on two legs. For a heartbeat, his eyes lifted, met hers. Recognition. A small flicker, barely visible, but she saw it. He knew her. Her stomach tightened. The urge to step forward, to speak, to break years of silence nearly broke her ribs, but she didn't. She held her rifle steady, her breath even. The delegation disappeared into the council chamber. She was left in the hall, the echo of boots fatting, her pulse still pounding. What was she supposed to do? Walk up to him, confront him in front of diplomats and officers? No, that wasn't discipline. That wasn't survival. But then, why had he looked at her like that? As though her silence was not invisible at all, as though he knew what lived behind it. The day dragged, layers of routine masking the storm in her chest. By dusk, she found herself in the courtyard again, standing guard at the gate as the sun bled into the horizon. That's when Rahim appeared again, shifting nervously at her side. You saw him, didn't you? Her head turned slowly. Rahim swallowed. I saw your face when he looked at you, you know him. Her voice cracked through the air, low but steady. You see too much. His eyes widened, not at her words but at her voice. Hearing her speak more than two words was rare enough to be a revelation. He hesitated, then asked quietly, do I keep it to myself? She studied him, the young guard with his brother's absence still fresh in his eyes. Could she trust him? Did trust even exist here? Finally she said, yes. That single word carried weight, a command but also a plea. Rahim nodded, then I will. They stood in silence together as the last light vanished. Two shadows beneath the palace gates, carrying ghosts they couldn't name. But inside her, the question sharpened. If that man remembered her, if he knew what his decisions had cost, then why was he here? Why now? And what would she do if silence no longer protected her? That night, she dreamed of the desert again. The convoy rattling over uneven roads, the smell of diesel and heat, her brother's laughter at her side, soft, unguarded, human. Then the blast, the fire, the ringing silence. She woke with her heart pounding, the memory so sharp it cut. And for the first time in years, she whispered into the darkness. Why him? No one answered. Only the sound of her own breath in the stillness of the barracks. Why did the palace suddenly feel like a trap? Morning light spilled across the marble floors, but it did little to warm the unease crawling through the halls. Orders had grown sharper. Guards doubled at every entrance. Radios crackled with coded updates. An invisible thread of tension stitched itself into every corner of the compound. She felt it the way a hunter feels silence before a storm, something unseen, waiting. The dignitary's entourage moved like pieces on a chessboard, calculated, rehearsed, watched from all angles. And yet her eyes kept drifting to him. The aide, the ghost from the desert. He walked with practiced anonymity, his gaze lowered, his steps small. But she knew masks when she saw them. Masks never fooled the people who had worn one themselves. By midday she was stationed at the western colonnade, a corridor where shadows fell long across the walls. The council session rumbled inside, muffled voices carrying faintly through closed doors. Every so often, footsteps echoed behind her, another guard, a messenger, the shuffle of advisors. Then nothing. A silence too complete. Her senses sharpened. She felt the shift the way a bird feels the air before a hawk strikes. Her hand hovered near the sling of her rifle, though she didn't move it yet. Guard. She spun slightly, just enough to see him, the aide, standing too close too suddenly. He raised his hand slightly, palms outward. "Don't call them, please." Her throat tightened. This was the man who had been the last voice her brother ever heard, and now he was here in her corridor, speaking directly to her. Every instinct screamed to raise her rifle, to end the silence with something final, but discipline held her still. His voice dropped lower, urgent. "You don't understand. I tried to stop it. That day I told them the convoy was too exposed. They ignored me. He cut himself off, scanning the empty hallway. "You think I don't remember you? I do. I remember your face. You were carrying him." Her breath caught. A flicker of heat burned behind her eyes, but she forced it down. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice flat, almost mechanical. His jaw tightened. "Neither do you, not if they knew what you carried inside." The words landed like a strike. For a moment she couldn't move. He wasn't wrong. Her silence had always been armor, but armor cracks when someone names what lies beneath. Before she could respond, heavy boots approached. The aide stepped back, melting into the shadows of a column. Two officers passed, nodding briefly at her before disappearing down the hall. When they were gone, he leaned forward again. His whisper cut through the still air. "There will be blood tomorrow, not from me, from them. And if you stay silent, you'll lose more than your brother." Then he was gone. The corridor swallowed him, leaving her with only the echo of his words. Her chest rose and fell in tight, sharp breaths. She wanted to believe he was lying, manipulating, a coward cloaking himself in warnings, but something in his voice, the fracture beneath the calm, told her otherwise. By evening, the whispers began. Anonymous threats had multiplied. Intelligence briefings grew vague, uncertain. Some guards dismissed it as noise, a tactic to rattle the palace during delicate talks, but she had lived through noise before, and noise always meant something real beneath it. Rahim found her again in the courtyard, packing near the gate like a restless shadow. "They say someone's already inside," he whispered. "A traitor, an insider." She studied him carefully. His face held the raw edge of fear, but also curiosity. Young men always mix the two. "What do you believe?" she asked. He hesitated. "I believe you know more than you say." She almost laughed at that, but the sound never reached her throat. Instead, she looked past him, toward the palace walls glowing in torchlight. They stood tall, proud, ancient. But even stone can bleed when struck right. Later, lying on her bunk, she replayed the aide's words. "There will be blood tomorrow." Tomorrow. Her fists clenched until her knuckles ached. If it was true, if an attack was already seated within these walls, then silence would not protect anyone. Yet breaking silence meant betraying the only shield she had left. Discipline had carried her this far. But what if discipline was just another word for cowardice? Sleep came late, jagged and thin. In her dream, she was back in the desert again. This time she carried her brother's body alone across endless dunes. His weight grew heavier with every step, but she refused to let go. And in the distance, she saw the palace, tall, unreachable, its gates closed. No one opened them for her. She woke gasping, sweat chilling her back despite the heat. The next dawn brought a stillness that felt wrong, too calm. Even the cicadas were silent. The guards assembled early, their faces set, their rifles gleaming in the morning light. Orders rolled out, sharp and precise, but her ears rang with something else, the echo of the aide's whisper. As they took their posts, Rahim caught her eye from across the courtyard. He gave the smallest nod, a question maybe, or a promise. And in that moment she realized, tomorrow had arrived. But she still didn't know which silence to keep, and which silence to finally break. Why did the air feel heavier before sunrise? The palace courtyard was still, shrouded in a pale gray hush. Guards stood at their posts, movements clipped, sharper than usual. Every shadow looked longer, every whisper seemed loaded. She stood at the northern gate again, her usual post, rifle across her chest, eyes steady, but inside a storm. The aide's words wouldn't leave her. There will be blood tomorrow. And now tomorrow had arrived. Boots scuffed stone nearby. Rahim approached quietly, his young face tighter than usual. He stopped beside her, his voice low. They doubled patrols, commands nervous. Something's coming, isn't it? She didn't answer, not yet. He looked at her, almost pleading. You know, don't you? Her jaw tightened. What could she say? That a man she once hated had whispered warnings in the dark, that his voice still haunted her like her brother's last breath. No, words would crack her armor, and cracks had no place here. So she gave him the same silence she gave everyone else. But Rahim didn't leave. He stayed beside her, hands flexing against his rifle. I'll watch your side, he said softly. It was a promise she hadn't asked for, but somehow it steadied her. The hours dragged. Couriers ran messages across the courtyard. Officers barked orders. The dignitaries' convoy prepared for departure after the council session. Everything looked controlled, perfect. But perfection always hides fractures. By midday, the dignitary emerged. His entourage flowed around him like a tide, suits, guards, aides. Cameras flashed. The palace gates loomed wide. And then the sound. A sharp crack, not a rifle, a charge. Small, contained, but loud enough to fracture the order of the moment. The crowd rippled, shouts, boots clattering, radios exploding with static. Her eyes swept fast, scanning angles, shadows, rooftops. Nothing, no muzzle flash, no clear source. Another crack, this one inside, from the council hall. Guards swarmed toward it, but her chest locked. This wasn't random. This was inside. Through the chaos she saw him, the aide, the ghost, standing near the dignitary, too close. His eyes darted once toward her, not fear, not guilt, something sharper, urgency. Their gazes locked. He mouthed one word. Run. Before she could move, the eastern corridor erupted. Two figures in palace guard uniforms, but wrong, too wrong, surged out, rifles raised. Their shots ripped through the air, striking marble, shattering glass. Screams tore through the courtyard. The dignitary's guards threw themselves forward, shields up, scrambling to cover him. Officers shouted conflicting orders. Chaos split the formation apart. She didn't think, she moved. Her rifle snapped into her hands, her breath sharp and precise. First shot, one figure dropped. Second shot, the other staggered, hit but not finished. Rahim shouted, behind you. She pivoted, the courtyard spinning in fragments of sound, boots, screams, gunfire. Another disguised attacker burst from the shadows, too close. She slammed the butt of her rifle into his jaw, felt the crack, then swung the barrel up, firing once, twice. Silence followed, shattered, jagged silence. But it wasn't over. Through the smoke and panic, she saw it, another man breaking from the convoy's shadow. A weapon hidden beneath his jacket, aimed directly at the dignitary. Her heart pounded, distance too far, angle wrong, no clean shot. And then the aide moved. He lunged at the man, tackling him hard against the steps. The weapon clattered across marble. Shouts rose, guards swarmed. She froze. The aide, the man she had hated, blamed, carried like a scar, had just saved the very life she was ordered to protect. And for a split second, he looked at her again, a look that carried 1,000 unspoken truths. Then chaos swallowed him. Guards dragged both men away, indistinguishable in the storm of uniforms. Her breath burned, her pulse thundered in her ears. Orders screamed across the courtyard. Lock down, secure the dignitary, sweep the palace. She moved like a machine, her body trained to obey. But her mind split in two. The mission was clear. Guard the palace, guard the dignitary, follow command. Discipline above all. But another voice whispered beneath it. What if he wasn't the enemy? What if silence has kept you blind? Hours later, the palace was sealed. The dignitary evacuated. The smoke cleared. Blood stained marble where glass once shimmered. Reports rolled in. 3 attackers disguised as palace guards. one captured alive, their allegiance still uncertain. And the aide detained with them. She sat in the barracks that night, helmet on the table, rifle across her knees. Rahim leaned against the wall opposite her, his face pale but unbroken. "You saved lives today," he said. Her eyes stayed on the rifle. "So did he," she replied quietly. Rahim frowned. "That aide, he's locked up with the others." Her voice was low, steady. "He warned me before it started. He fought one of them. Without him," she stopped. The words tasted strange, bitter. "Without him, the dignitary would be dead." Rahim stared at her, conflicted. Then why treat him like the enemy? Her silence was heavy because she knew the answer, because she had wanted him to be the enemy, needed him to be. But reality didn't bend for grief. She rose, strapping her rifle back into place. Her boots clicked against the barrack floor, steady, disciplined. Yet inside, for the first time in years, silence felt fragile. Because tomorrow had come, blood had spilled, and now discipline alone would not be enough to carry her through what came next. Why did victory feel so much like failure? The palace gleamed under morning sun, but the shine felt false. The marble steps were scrubbed, the broken glass swept away, blood stains hidden beneath hurried polish. Yet she knew. The stones remembered. The echoes of gunfire still lived between the columns. Command called it success. The dignitary survived, the palace held, order restored. But her chest told a different story. Because the man they chained, dragged away, and threw into a windowless room was not an attacker. Not to her eyes. Not after the way he'd lunged into danger, disarmed a killer, saved a life. She had seen the truth, and discipline demanded she pretend otherwise. That evening she stood outside the courtyard barracks, helmet under her arm, watching shadows lengthen over the palace walls. Her hands were steady, her boots aligned, her posture perfect. But inside, questions cut her clean. Rahim joined her, quieter than usual. His youth had dimmed since yesterday's chaos. His eyes held weight now, the kind you don't lose once carried. "They're interrogating him," Rahim murmured. She didn't ask who, she already knew. "They think he was working with them," Rahim added. "That he turned on his own to look innocent. Clever cover, they say." Her jaw clenched. She wanted to laugh bitterly, but discipline turned it into silence. Clever cover or cowardly blindness. Command needed an enemy, someone to point at, and he was convenient. Rahim studied her face. "You don't believe it." Her eyes stayed forward. "I saw him fight." Rahim nodded slowly. "So did I." The admission tightened something in her chest. She wasn't alone in knowing, but knowing and speaking were different things. That night she couldn't sleep. The barracks felt suffocating, every breath heavy. Memories pressed in, the desert, her brother, the aide's warning. There will be blood tomorrow. He had been right. If he had been right about that, what else was true? Discipline told her to bury it. Let command decide. Let silence keep her safe. But another voice, faint, quiet, almost forgotten, rose from within. Her brother's voice. "Don't just stand. Don't just watch." Her fists tightened. She rose before dawn. Her boots barely whispered against the stone as she moved through the palace corridors. Guards on night rotation gave her nods, none questioning. She walked like she belonged because she did. And that was her shield. Downward, toward the wing no cameras entered, no visitors saw, where locked doors carried secrets. The cell block. The air was colder there. Damp stone, thick shadows, a silence broken only by the drip of unseen pipes. She paused outside the last door, a heavy lock, a faint glow slipping through the slit. A guard stood nearby, arms crossed. Older, weary, he barely glanced at her. "Orders," she said, her voice crisp. "Routine inspection." The guard frowned. "Inspection at this hour." She met his gaze, not angry, not pleading, just steady. Her silence carried its own weight. After a moment he shrugged. "Fine, quick." He unlocked the door. Inside, the room was bare. A single chair, a table, and him. The aide sat shackled, his suit torn, his face bruised. He looked smaller now, stripped of the illusion of power. But when his eyes lifted to hers, recognition flared. "You," he whispered. She stepped inside. The door clanged shut behind her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally she said, low and sharp, "Why did you warn me?" His laugh was bitter, hollow. "Because I'm tired of watching silence kill people." Her chest tightened. He leaned forward, chains rattling. "I told them the convoy wasn't safe that day. They ignored me, said discipline mattered more than risk. And you carried the cost. I saw your face. I see it still." She swallowed, the air thick in her throat. "I came here with him," the aide continued. "Yes, I serve him, but I knew the threats weren't noise. I tried to sound alarms. They don't listen. They never listen. But you," his eyes locked onto hers. "You don't need words, you see." Her hands curled into fists at her sides. "You think I'm your enemy," he said softly. "I'm not. The real enemy walks your halls right now, wearing your uniform." The words hit like a strike. She wanted to deny it, wanted to cling to the safety of silence, but she remembered the attackers in palace guard uniforms, the chaos, the confusion, and Rahim's whisper, "They say someone's already inside." Her breath grew shallow. "Help me," the aide said, not begging, not commanding, just steady, "or watch it happen again." The door creaked. Heavy boots approached outside. She turned away from him, schooling her face back into stone. The guard opened the door, impatient. "Enough, out." She left without another word. But her silence this time was different. Not discipline, not denial. It was choice. Back in the barracks, Rahim found her sitting rigid, staring at nothing. He hesitated, then asked quietly, "Did you go to him?" Her head turned, slowly, sharply. Rahim raised his hands. "I won't tell. I just need to know if we're blind, because if we are," his voice cracked, "I don't want to be the next brother carried in the sand." The words cut too deep, too raw. She looked at him, really looked, his fear, his loyalty, his youth already marked by grief. And in that moment she realized, silence would not protect him either. Her choice was no longer about her, or her brother. It was about the living. Her discipline had crushed Mockery, silenced doubt, shielded her from breaking. But discipline alone could not stop betrayal from bleeding the palace again. Something inside her shifted, not shattered, shifted. And she knew, the next silence she broke would change everything. The palace at dawn looked like something out of a legend. Golden light spilled over marble spires, birds circled lazily above, fountains sang in the courtyards. To the casual eye it was peace, order, a fortress unshaken. But she knew better. Every column, every hallway, every uniform now whispered suspicion. The aide's words burrowed in her skull like a splinter. "The real enemy walks your halls right now." She wanted to ignore it, wanted to bury it. But Rahim's voice kept breaking through, trembling with fear. "I don't want to be the next brother carried in the sand." Her silence had protected her once. Now it threatened to kill others. And so she made her choice. Not openly, not yet. A palace guard didn't survive by shouting treason into the wind. No, if she was going to break the silence, she would do it the same way she'd survived every storm since the desert, with precision, with patience, with discipline. But this time the discipline would serve truth, not blind obedience. She began with eyes, watching, recording, every rotation, every step, every face in the palace corridors. Patterns mattered. She had learned that on patrols in the wastelands, enemy footprints told stories when no voice spoke. And here the palace had many footprints. Rahim noticed her new vigilance. "You're sharper than usual," he muttered one evening as they patrolled the western gallery, sunlight bleeding through stained glass. Her gaze swept the guards stationed there. "We've bled too much to be careless." Rahim followed her eyes, then leaned closer. "Who do you think it is?" She didn't answer, not because she didn't trust him, but because words carried weight. Words repeated. Silence, used wisely, still shielded them. But Rahim was young, restless. It has to be someone high enough to direct uniforms. That's not a foot soldier. Her jaw tightened. She had thought the same. That night when the barracks settled into uneasy sleep, she slipped into the records office. Not breaking locks, not yet. She walked like she belonged. Her authority, her spotless record, her reputation as stone made her invisible. Inside, by the light of a single lamp, she traced logs of duty rosters, guard rotations during the attack, names, signatures. And there a fracture. 2 guards signed for the same post at the same hour, a duplication impossible under proper command. One of them had been elsewhere, wearing another man's face, or covering tracks. Her chest tightened as she memorized the names. Then footsteps. She killed the lamp in a single breath and flattened against the shelves. The door opened, a shadow slipped in, broad shoulders, familiar boots. Her pulse hammered. The man crossed to the same logs, his movements quick, practiced. He tore a page free, folded it, slipped it under his vest. Then he left. She stayed frozen long after the door shut, her lungs refusing air. When at last she returned to her bunk, her body was stiff with tension. She didn't sleep. At dawn, she saw him again, standing proud at parade formation, face calm, voice sharp. A superior officer. The one praised for his discipline, his loyalty, his spotless record. The one every guard looked up to. The one who had walked into the records room like a man, checking his own reflection. Her stomach turned. That evening, Rahim found her sharpening her bayonet in the courtyard shadows. "You've seen something." Her hands moved steady, sparks flashing from the blade. "You're too quick." "Or you're too loud," Rahim countered softly. Then after a pause, "Who is it?" Her eyes flicked up to his. She weighed him like a blade in her palm. Could she trust him with a name? Could she risk breaking silence here now? Rahim's eyes held fear, but beneath it something else. Loyalty. She exhaled just one word. "Commander Javed." Rahim froze. "No." "Yes." That's his breath caught. "If you're wrong." "I'm not." Silence stretched between them, heavy, dangerous. Finally, Rahim whispered, "What do we do?" She looked at the palace towers glowing against the night. "We watch, we gather, we prove." Because discipline, she realized, didn't mean obeying blindly. True discipline was control of fear, of impulse, of noise, and she would use it like a weapon. Days blurred into shadows and whispers. She tracked Javed's movements, where he lingered, who he spoke with, what he touched. Twice, she saw him vanish into restricted corridors at odd hours. Once, she found the faint smell of gun oil in a chamber where no weapons should have been. And always he returned to the parade ground spotless, untouchable. The aide's words echoed louder now, "Help me, or watch it happen again." And she knew the attack had not been the end. It had been the test. Rahim's nerves frayed. If he strikes again, the palace will burn with it. Her answer was steady, even as her heart pounded. "Then we strike first." The choice crystallized one stormy night. Rain hammered the palace walls, thunder rattled the towers. Guards grumbled, shifting under dripping helmets. She and Rahim patrolled near the armory. That's when they saw him. Commander Javed slipping inside, no orders, no escort. Her hand closed around Rahim's arm before he could speak. "Quiet." They followed, silent as shadows. Inside, the air smelled of oil and steel. Racks of rifles gleamed under lantern light. And there Javed, pulling open crates, checking weapons, counting, marking, preparing. Not for defense, for something else. She felt her pulse climb into her throat. The truth was no longer suspicion. It was in front of her, in flesh and shadow. Javed turned suddenly, lantern light flashing across his face. For an instant his eyes met hers. Her breath froze. Then his mouth curled, not in surprise, not in fear, in recognition. He knew she knew. The silence between them shattered like glass. And she realized the war inside the palace had begun. How do you hold your breath when the world itself is about to exhale? The armory smelled of oil, dust, and thunder. Outside, rain-battered stone walls, each strike echoing like a countdown. Inside, 3 figures stood frozen in the lantern glow. Rahim and Commander Javed. The silence stretched, a silence heavier than any explosion. Jave didn't flinch, didn't reach for a weapon. He simply looked at her like a teacher eyeing a student caught peeking behind the curtain. Then he spoke, calm, measured. "You were supposed to stay blind." Her jaw tightened. The rain outside swallowed her reply. Jave's gaze shifted to Rahim, the boy's trembling breath too loud in the quiet. "You should learn, son. Some truths weigh too much for men like us. Better to carry orders, cleaner, safer." Rahim's voice cracked. You betrayed them, you betrayed us." Jave's smile was small, sad almost. "No, I betrayed illusions. This palace, this kingdom is rotting. I didn't cut the rot. I let it fester until the right buyer came." Her pulse slammed against her ribs. The right buyer, that meant outside hands, foreign, ruthless, the kind who didn't just want power, they wanted destruction. Her hand twitched near her rifle. Jave noticed. His eyes hardened. "You won't raise that," he said. "Not here, not against me." But discipline wasn't his alone to claim. Discipline was hers too, sharpened not into obedience, but into restraint. She didn't move, not yet. "Why?" she asked finally. Her voice sounded smaller than she meant, but sharper too. "Why kill your own? Why sell them?" Jave's mouth twisted. "Because loyalty doesn't feed widows, because medals don't warm children, because the men who command us would rather we die in silence than admit their walls are cracks and dust. So I chose differently. I chose profit. I chose survival." Survival. The word cut deep. For a moment she saw her brother's face, smiling through desert dust, swearing they'd both survive the patrol that never ended. She had carried his silence for years, and now the man before her spit the word like a curse. Something inside her shifted. Rahim whispered, "We should tell the council now." Jave's eyes sharpened. "You won't leave this room." The lantern flame flickered as thunder boomed. Jave moved fast, faster than a man his age should, hand darting for the pistol at his hip. Her rifle swung up in the same breath. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then Rahim lunged. Not for Javed, for the lantern. He smashed it to the ground, plunging the armory into blackness. Chaos erupted. Steel scraped, boots crashed against crates, the smell of smoke and oil surged as the lantern hissed out. She moved by instinct, dropping low, rifle steady, ears straining in the dark. Jave's breath rasped to her left. Rahim stumbled to her right. Then gunfire. A muzzle flash seared the dark. Wood splintered near her head. She rolled, slammed against a crate, returned fire, 1, 2 controlled bursts. The flashes lit Jave's face, teeth bared, eyes wild. Silence. Then his footsteps retreated, pounding deeper into the armory. Rahim hissed, "He's running." She caught his arm, steadying him. Not running, setting the board. Because men like Javed didn't flee. They repositioned. And in this armory, surrounded by rifles, grenades, and crates of ammunition, he had the board tilted in his favor. The storm outside raged harder. Wind howled through a crack in the shutters. Shadows danced as fire from the shattered lantern spread across oil stains. "We can't let him out," she said. Her voice was calm, too calm. "If he leaves, the palace burns." Rahim swallowed, nodded. His hands trembled, but he raised his rifle. They moved together, sweeping the dark rows. Every creak of wood, every drip of rain through the roof, every shift of fabric against steel made her nerves scream. Then a whisper, Javed's voice soft, cruel. You think you're soldiers, but you're just children guarding kings who wouldn't bleed for you." She froze. The voice came from everywhere at once, bouncing off metal and stone. Rahim's breath hitched. She pressed a finger to her lips, then pointed left. They crept forward, each step slower than a heartbeat. Suddenly, a clatter. A crate toppled behind them. Rahim spun, fired, sparks flew. And in that instant, Javed struck. He came out of the dark like a shadow given flesh, slamming into Rahim, wrenching the boy's rifle free. Rahim cried out, the sound cutting through the storm. She fired. The shot grazed Javed's shoulder, spinning him but not stopping him. He shoved Rahim aside, disappearing again into blackness. The boy groaned, clutching his ribs. He's trying to draw us out." She knelt, gripping his shoulder. "Stay low, breathe." Her chest ached with fury. Not at Rahim's weakness, at Javed's precision. The man had been forged in the same discipline as her, but bent toward betrayal instead of honor. And discipline against discipline was the deadliest war. She closed her eyes for one breath, listened, not with ears but with memory, footsteps, weight, timing. Javed had favored his left leg for months after an old injury. He always shifted slightly before striking. Always. There a scrape, soft, deliberate. She moved. Rifle up, firing before thought. The blast lit the aisle. Javed staggered, blood blooming at his thigh. His snarl echoed through the armory. "You should have stayed blind." But she didn't answer. Discipline kept her mouth closed, her hands steady, her breath even. Javed limped into the firelight, pistol raised, face twisted in rage. And in that final heartbeat, she saw not the commander, not the traitor, but the reflection of what she could have become if she had let silence rot her soul. Discipline bent to survival, silence bent to greed. "No." She squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked like thunder. Javed fell. The storm outside howled. The fire crept higher. And for the first time in years, her silence broke, not with words but with the finality of a choice. The armory reeked of smoke and blood. Rahim stumbled to her side, coughing, his wide eyes fixed on Javed's body. He's dead." She exhaled, steady, controlled. "No, he's finished. That's different." They dragged his body clear of the spreading flames, then sealed the armory behind them. The palace guards would find the wreckage soon. Questions would come, suspicion, fear. But the real war wasn't finished. Javed had said buyer, outside hands. The traitor was dead, but his shadow stretched far beyond these walls. As they limped through rain-soaked courtyards, she felt no triumph, only weight. Rahim finally asked, voice raw, "What happens now?" She looked at the towers rising against the storm. "Now," she said quietly, "we carry the silence differently." The boy frowned. "I don't understand." She touched the rifle at her shoulder, rain sliding down the steel. "Silence isn't obedience. Silence is choice. And tomorrow it won't protect anyone unless we choose where to break it." Rahim nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his young eyes. The storm eased, thunder rolling into distance. But inside her, another storm was only beginning. Why did victory taste like ash? The palace should have been alive with relief, a traitor uncovered, a threat stopped, the armory saved from fire, its weapons intact, yet the halls felt emptier than before, colder. She moved through them like a ghost, her boots echoing too loudly against marble floors. Eyes followed her, whispers trailed her, but no one spoke to her directly. The official account spread quickly. Commander Javed died in an accident during the storm. A lantern mishap, flames, confusion. The council wanted silence, always silence. And she gave it. But inside, her chest burned, because silence no longer felt like armor. It felt like weight pressing against ribs that were already cracked with old grief. Rahim found her on the wall at sunrise, leaning against the stone parapet, her rifle slung across her back. The boy's face looked older, eyes darker. The storm had aged him in one night. "They don't believe us," he said quietly. "They don't want to," she replied. Rahim's jaw tightened. Then what was it for? If no one listens, if they bury the truth again, what did it cost us? Her gaze drifted east, where the desert stretched endless and unforgiving. Somewhere out there, her brother still lay in sand. His silence had cost everything. "We're not done," she said. Rahim looked at her. "Then what's next?" She didn't answer. Not yet, because the next step wasn't clear. The aide's warning still rang in her ears. The right buyer. Someone out there still pulled the strings. Javed had been a piece, not the hand. And if the hand was still moving, the palace remained a board. That night she dreamed again. Her brother stood in the desert, the convoy behind him burning. He didn't look angry. He didn't even look sad. He just watched her, waiting. When she tried to speak, no sound left her throat, only silence. But then he nodded, as if to say, silence was never meant to last forever. She woke before dawn, sweat cooling on her neck, her heart racing. The decision came clear. The next day she found the aide. He was exactly where she knew he would be, by the colonnade, pretending to fade into background duties. But when her shadow fell across him, he stiffened. "You should have left me alone," he murmured. "And let the palace burn?" she asked. He glanced around, then at her eyes. "Javed's dead." She said nothing. He swallowed. "Then you know what that means. The buyer won't stop. They'll just send another." She stepped closer, voice steady. "Tell me who." His expression twisted: guilt, fear, resignation. "If I tell you, you'll be hunted. By your own, by them, by everyone." "I already am," she said. Silence stretched. Then he whispered a name, one that carried weight, influence, reach beyond borders. The name felt like a knife in her chest, not because it was shocking, but because it made everything clear. The rot wasn't a single man. It was a chain, links stretching farther than she had ever seen. The aide's voice cracked. "You can't fight it alone." Her eyes didn't waver. "I won't." She began to prepare, not loudly, not recklessly. Discipline shaped her every move. She and Rahim trained in shadows, refining signals, tightening movements, learning to read each other without words. They didn't plan grand assaults or coups. No, they planned to survive long enough to speak truth where it mattered most. Because sometimes the strongest blow wasn't a bullet. It was a revelation no wall could bury. But revelations carried risk. And risk meant sacrifice. The final test came faster than she expected. An inspection, a council assembly, every guard in parade formation, every rifle gleaming under the noon sun. The dignitary stood tall at the podium, speeches rolling like polished stones. And then movement, too small for most eyes but not hers. A hand signal, a subtle shift near the rear line of guards. She saw it, recognized it, a command buried inside ritual. Rahim saw it too, his knuckles whitened around his rifle. The silence of the courtyard thickened, heavy, suffocating. She had one choice: to obey the discipline of rank or to obey the discipline of truth. Her voice cut across the assembly like a blade. "Stop." The single word cracked the silence. Heads turned, confusion rippled. And in that heartbeat of distraction, the traitor moved. A guard pivoted, rifle lifting toward the dignitary. Her shot was faster. The blast echoed off marble. The would-be assassin dropped. Chaos erupted, guards shouted, weapons rose, the council scrambled. And through it all, she stood tall, rifle still smoking, her silence finally broken. By evening, the palace was split. Half called her savior, half called her traitor. Investigations swarmed, rumors spread like fire. But one truth could not be erased. Her silence had shattered, and in its place stood undeniable proof. The rot was real. The palace could no longer pretend. Rahim sat beside her in the barracks, his hands shaking from the day's storm. "They'll come for you," he whispered. I know. Then why speak now? She looked at him, at the boy who had almost died in the armory, at the boy who had begged not to be the next body carried in sand. Because silence doesn't always protect, she said softly. Sometimes silence kills. Rahim nodded, tears pricking his eyes. And she reached out, steadying his hand with hers. But remember this. Dignity doesn't shout, it doesn't argue, it doesn't beg, it simply acts. That's what they'll remember long after we're gone. The final dawn came quiet. She stood once more on the palace wall, rifle slung, desert wind brushing against her face. Somewhere below, council chambers buzzed with politics, rumors, blame. Somewhere beyond, the buyer still waited, pulling unseen strings. But here, in this fragile silence, she found a strange peace. Because silence was no longer her prison. It was her weapon, her choice. And as the sun broke over the horizon, she let the silence speak louder than any words could.